So up to this point, our Tycoon is in a working state. You can get drops and you can turn them into money. But it doesn't work like an actual game. When you join in, you're not teleported to your Tycoon, and when you leave, your Tycoon stays there. So in this video, we're going to work to fix that. We're going to add the ability for multiplayers to join and their Tycoons to spawn in the right location, and then if one player leaves, their Tycoon is destroyed. So if you enjoy this video, make sure to like it, subscribe to stay up to date with the Tycoon series, join my Discord server, the link is in the description. But without further ado, let's get started. So before we can get to the meat of the video where we create our spawn system, we first have to do some cleanup and housekeeping in our player manager to make it a little bit better and a little more secure for all situations. So let's go to our player manager and server script service player manager. And firstly, I want to add a for loop that will basically be called whenever start is called to allow all of the players who have joined before start has been called to actually be added to the game, because sometimes this event connection will connect after someone has joined. It's pretty rare, it hasn't really happened to me, but it's possible, so we have to contend with that. So I'm going to add a for loop above our player added event and say for underscore player in I pairs players get players do. And then all we want to do is call our onPlayer added function. But one thing you want to keep in mind is sometimes our onPlayer added will yield, and in fact ours will yield in the future when we add data storage and data saving. So we want to make sure each of our onPlayer added functions runs in a different thread. And we've already used coroutines in our Tycoon, so I won't really go over that, but I have a video on it if you're interested. So we can use a coroutine dot, oh, I spelled that wrong, coroutine dot wrap, and we can wrap player manager dot on player added. And then after we wrap that function, put another set of parentheses and send in the player. So this will wrap our player added function into another coroutine, which can be called with these parentheses, sending in the value of our player. So this will make sure all of our players are loaded in properly. And now let's go to the top of our script, and we can define a local variable called local player added, and this will be equal to instance.new bindable event. So we have this player added block right here just as a bindable event, because we'll call this once we're done managing our player and our on player added down here. So in order for people or for modules outside of our player manager to get access to this bindable event, we can add another variable, but this one will be under our player manager by saying player manager dot player added equals player added dot event. So you may be wondering, why can't I just put the instance.new bindable event down here? And that's because it makes a little more sense for other modules to just directly connect to player added. They don't have to say dot event, and this also prevents them from firing our player added event, because we do not want any other modules to be able to fire this. So that's why we're gonna shove it inside here, so only our player manager will be able to access it. And so for right now, in our onPlayer added function, we can just say, like, make a few lines and just say player added fire with the value of player. So after we add data loading and data saving, once the data is loaded, we'll be able to fire this, just so modules who depend on players loading in don't get their money before they've like fully loaded in. So that's why we'll have that right here. So now we can go to our server script and make one change. You see we have game get service players dot player added. We can get rid of this and just say player manager dot player added. And that really shouldn't change anything. It should just make our game a little bit more robust. And let's just play this, make sure everything works. It does. That's great. So now we can move on to the actual spawn system for our tycoons in our game. And when I was making the system, I've ran into a few problems. First of all, whenever a tycoon spawns, the player loads in too quickly, and it's kind of janky to let the player load in and then teleport them to where their tycoon has spawned. So I found a unique workaround to this where I make it so the player doesn't load in when they spawn in, and then you manually load them in once you've assigned them a spawn. So that's going to take a little bit of work to get done, so let's do it. Now go to Players in your Explorer and deselect or uncheck Character Auto Loads. And what that does is when I press play, my character won't load. You can see my camera is just at 000 pointing down and nothing happens. So in order to load our player, we have to say player load character, and that's how we'll do that. But we only want to do that on our terms. So let's go into our Tycoon and add that functionality. So I'm going to go down to Tycoon init, and I'm going to say self.owner.respawn location equals our respawn location. So let's add our respawn location. I'm going to go to server storage, drag our Tycoon template into the workspace, select it here, and then I want to add a spawn location to our Tycoon so that whenever the player dies and respawns, they'll spawn here just to make it a little bit easier to get back to their spawn, or their Tycoon. So I'm going to go to model and then spawn, click spawn, you have the spawn. I'm going to move it about here and make it a lot smaller. It's kind of big, kind of chunky. Let me actually just change the size. I'll change it to like 2. I'm going to change it to 2 by 0.5 by 2. There you go. So that's about good. I'm just going to leave it about there. Shove it into our template. And I'm going to name it spawn. And I'm going to go back into our Tycoon. And where we say self.owner.respawn location, I can set it to self.model.spawn. Or whatever you named it inside your template. And then make sure to take your template and drag it back into server storage once you're done. So now our player's respawn location, and by the way, each player has a value called respawn location that can be assigned to a spawn location. That's what we're using here, and that'll just ensure that they always respawn there. But it's not guaranteed that they'll spawn there initially, so that's why we had to disable character auto loading. So now, once we set our respawn location, we can say self.owner load character to put the character into the game. So let's try that out. You can see we spawn right on this pad, right where we want to, and everything works perfectly. But let's say we want to reset the character. Nothing happens. Our character does not respawn. So we're going to have to add some extra code to fix this. It's very simple. All we have to do is go into the player manager, and in our onPlayerAdded, we want to add another block and say player.onCharacterAdded will connect a function with the new character. I'm just going to say character. There we go. And then all we have to do is I'm going to call another function, but I'm going to make it down here first. And this function is going to be named playerManager.onCharacterAdded. And this function will take in the player and the character. And I'll show you why we need a player in just a second, but it's kind of annoying that we have to make this new function block, but you kind of have to. So we have this new function onCharacterAdded. It's never being called, so let's add it to our onCharacterAdded connection up here by saying playerManager.onCharacterAdded and pass in the player and then the character. So we're getting the player from the onPlayerAdded and the character from the onCharacterAdded, and we send them both in. And then inside the onCharacterAdded block, we can first get the character's humanoid, and this will be done by saying local humanoid equals character find first child humanoid. So we have to make sure it exists by saying if humanoid, then, and then we want to detect when the player's humanoid's character dies, and we want to respawn them. And that's pretty simple. All we have to do is say humanoid died. So when the humanoid dies, when the player dies, we connect another function, and this function won't have any arguments, and then we'll wait for 3 seconds, and then we'll say player load character. So this wait can be set to whatever you want, whatever your respawn time you want to be, but 3 seconds is pretty good for me. So after they die, it'll wait 3 seconds and then reload the player character. And then once that happens, the on character added will fire again, and this whole cycle will repeat. So let's play this. Okay, so I think this is a misspell. Yeah, so right here, it's not supposed to be on character added, it's supposed to be character added. So player.character added. The function we have is named on character added, but we want to have player on character added, not on character added. Let's try that again. Because you spawn in, everything works fine. And then when you go to reset your character, you die, and then after 3 seconds, you will respawn. And you respawn right where you're supposed to without any further input, which is exactly what we want. So this is the first step into getting our little Tycoon spawn system. So now the player spawns at their Tycoon. But we want the Tycoon to spawn at a spawn point that we designate before the game. So I'm going to create a new folder in the workspace folder, and I'm going to name this folder spawns. And so this will be where all of our spawn points for our Tycoon will be. These spawn points do not have to be spawn locations. Spawn locations are meant for player characters. We're not using player characters, we're using Tycoon models, so it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to create a sphere and put the sphere inside of spawns. I'm going to make this sphere a 1x1x1 sphere, just so it looks a little better. There you go. I'm going to make it like semi-transparent. And then change the color to a nice, like red or something. So you can see it a little bit better. You can obviously, once you're done placing them around, make them invisible so you can't see them. But I just like to have them visible for testing, which we're doing right now. So I'm going to leave this part here, maybe make another one like over here. And this can be the 2 spawns that we'll have for right now, just to make sure the system works. And you don't have to name these spawns anything special. You can just leave them as part. So now let's go back to our server, and we're going to make a function called find spawn. So I'm going to say local function find spawn. Won't have any arguments. And then what we want to do is loop through each part in our spawns and check for an attribute. So how our spawn system is going to work is whenever a spawn is occupied, whenever a Tycoon is at a spawn, because we definitely do not want multiple Tycoons spawning in the same exact location. That would just be stupid. We set an attribute on the part called like occupied. You can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to use occupied because occupied is a nice word that makes sense there. And you set that to true when there's a Tycoon there, and you set it to false when it's not there. So I can do that here by saying for underscore spawn point in iPairs, and then we want to get our spawn. So I'm just going to say workspace dot spawns get children do, and then we want to check if the spawn point is occupied by saying if spawn point get attribute occupied. So we want to make sure they're not occupied. So we can say if not spawn point get attribute occupied, then we return the spawn point. So what this will do is it'll look through all of our spawn points, find the one that's not occupied, and then return this. Notice how this function does not have any fail-safes. If your game does not have enough spawn points for the amount of players in like the max players that you have, this will error eventually. So make sure you have well over enough spawn points. So like if your Tycoon game has 10 players allowed, make like 12 spawn points just in case something happens and there's extra players, whatever. You want to have more spawn points than there is players allowed in your game. And I think most Roblox games default at like 50 people per game, so that's kind of stupid. You don't want that. You want to lower that. And then when we're going to call this function, we're going to call it down here. So when we say tycoon.new, we've only been passing the player. But now we're going to pass in a spawn point. And that spawn point will just be passed in by saying find spawn. So find spawn will get a spawn, it'll return it, and it'll pass it to our tycoon.new. So let's go to our tycoon.new. And then right next to our player, we can add another argument called spawn point. And we don't really need the spawn point for that much. All we're going to do is say self._spawn equals spawn point. And this will just be used for later reference. And we'll use it down here in our init by saying self_spawn set attribute occupied. And then we want to set it to the string occupied and then the value of true. So this will set our spawn to occupied. And then down here in our destroy function, we can say self_spawn set attribute occupied to false. So when our tycoon is destroyed, we will make it ready to be occupied again. So let's try this out. So the tycoon spawns at one of the spawn points, and occupied is set to true. Let's verify that. Let's go to workspace, spawns, and then let me scroll down. Okay, this one, occupied, is set to true. One thing I forgot to do is actually set the C-frame of our tycoon, so we should probably do that. In our new model function, you can see we set cframe.new 010. Let's change this to self_spawn.cframe. So let's try that again. I was wondering why the spawn was across the map. That was it. So now we actually spawn at a spawn. And we can verify that by going to workspace spawns. Yeah, you can see it's highlighted in blue right here. One last thing we want to do is clean up our tycoon once the player leaves. So with our previously set up infrastructure, that should be pretty easy. So let's go to our player manager. Repeat the same process we did for the player added bindable event by saying local player removing equal instance.new bindable event. And then below our player manager player added, we can say player manager.player removing equals player removing dot event. And now we can hook that up in our start. Let's go down below our onCharacter added. Actually, let's go to the almost very bottom, and we can create a function player manager dot on player removing. It'll take in the player that is being removed, and all we're going to do here is say player removing fire with the player. Eventually, we'll add logic to save our player's data, but for right now, this is all we're going to do in our player removing, just to notify all the tycoons when a player leaves. And right now, this will never get called, so let's go back to the player manager start function, and all we have to do is say players.player removing connect player manager dot on player removing. There you go. And so now when our player leaves, a player removing will be fired. And we can use that in our tycoon by waiting for a player to leave and then comparing it with our owner. And if our owner is equal to the player that's leaving, we destroy the tycoon and call our destroy function, which for up to this point has done absolutely nothing. So let's try that. Let's go to the very top of our script and say local player manager equals require script dot parent dot player manager. So now we have our player manager, and then in our tycoon, I'm going to go to the very bottom and add a function right before destroy, and this will be a function tycoon wait for exit. And all this will do is wait for our owner to leave. So let's add the functionality. So in here, all we're going to do is say player manager dot player removing connect So we're going to connect to the bindable event when the player leaves, and we're going to connect a function. I'm going to make sure the player manager is spelled correctly, and then we'll connect to the player, and then we'll say if self.owner equals or double equals player, then we want to say self-destroy. So if the player that's leaving is our owner, so if our owner left the game, we want to get rid of the Tycoon. When we get rid of the Tycoon, the model will get destroyed, our topic event will get destroyed, and then our spawn will be unoccupied again. So that's great. So let's go to the top to our init function and call self wait for exit. So now let's test everything we've created in this video. In order to do that, go to test in the top of your screen. So here's test. And then I'm going to select local server. And then I like to have my tests have 2 players. You can add 4 or whatever. I'm just going to add 2 since we only have 2 spawns right now. And I'm going to click start. So this will bring up 3 different windows. The first is a server window, which I have on my second monitor. You can see it by the little green outline. And this is what the server sees. And then the next 2 windows are the players, which have this blue outline here. So you can see both players spawn in. They can do whatever they want. You can spawn a copper dropper. And you can see they can interact and whatever. So let's say one of the players leaves. So in order to simulate leaving, all you can do is just click the X. This player here, you can see the Tycoon is gone. And if we go to the server, let me bring back the server, and we go to workspace spawns, you can see one of the spawns is occupied and the other one is not occupied. And then now, if you're done with your test, just press the cleanup button. It will delete all of the other windows. So that's our test done. And that's it for this video. So I hope you enjoyed. We got a lot done today. This turns our Tycoon, which is functional in the last video, into a fully functioning game almost. Because players can leave and join, and their mess is cleaned up after they leave. And they spawn in appropriately wherever you put your Tycoon spawns. So I hope you enjoyed that. Make sure to like the video if you did. Subscribe to stay up to date with the Tycoon series. And comment any questions or suggestions down below. So other than that, I hope you have a nice day, and goodbye.